Saudi Arabia's cabinet recently approved the decision to join the China-led Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which may be a sign that Riyadh, with all of its energy reserves, is picking sides in the Ukraine war, while relations with the United States are continuing to deteriorate. Since the Chinese brokered a rebuke between the kingdom and Iran in 1996, the SCO has become more closely tied to Russia and China, in part stung by U.S. President Joe Biden's refusal to negotiate with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Saudi Arabia is enlarging its diplomatic ties with both nations, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. Since then, most other Central Asian governments have joined in addition to Russia and Tajikistan. In 2001, it admitted other Central Asian governments and changed its name to the SCO, a military, political, and economic partnership organization. The SCO has nearly half of the world's population as members, observers, or partners. In nominal terms, or pure dollar terms, it represents just over 40% in purchasing power parity, and critically, in 2017 Pakistan and India, and in 2023. To put that in context, PP is a word that gauges economic power adjusted for the cost of commodities in a country or set of countries. The SCO already had greater economic clout than the G7 and held its most recent round of joint military drills in 2021. The G7 comprises a far smaller population and only around 27% of the global economy in PPP terms. It will be interesting to see how Saudi Arabia engages militarily in this edging closer to Beijing, given that China has recently improved its diplomatic standing by negotiating a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Saudi Arabia is joining the SCO, which regularly holds joint military and counterterrorism exercises, with the next one scheduled for later in 2023. One of the reasons the Middle East and Iran have remained unstable, split, and unable to pursue a regional approach to their problems is the multiple Iranian-Arab disagreements. The largest crude oil exporter in the world, Saudi Aramco, wagers on the ongoing increase in Chinese oil consumption. Saudi Arabia is placing significant bets on the expanding demand for crude. China, the world's biggest importer of crude oil, is increasing its downstream footprint and crude supply market share. This week, Saudi Aramco announced 2 significant refinery and petrochemical transitions in China that will provide the largest oil company in the world with a portion of the Chinese downstream market, as well as an extra export outlet for 690,000 barrels per day BPD of Saudi crude. Saudi Arabia stakes its future on the ongoing rise of Chinese oil demand on the one hand, and the kingdom's desire to increase its market share in the top oil importer in the world, where it is an OPSC plus member following the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the ensuing sanctions against Moscow. Russia has increased its market share with affordable crude. Russia and Saudi Arabia have been competing for market share on the Chinese oil market for years. But since the beginning of the conflict in the Ukraine, Russia has turned its attention to Asia and is now banking on China and India as its main consumers of its crude, which is frequently sold at steep discounts to international benchmarks. Saudi Arabia guarantees a portion of the Chinese market by selling its crude oil under long-term contracts. But Russia, which has shifted its crude and fuel sales to Asia in response to Western sanctions, is providing its oil at a discount and may draw more Chinese consumers who disregard the G. 7 price caps. China boosted the purchase of inexpensive Russian crude oil at discounts to international benchmarks in January and February, overtaking Saudi Arabia, which had previously been the country's top oil supplier to China. Chinese imports of Russian petroleum increased by 23.8% year-over-year to 194 million BPD in January and February 2023, according to data from China's General Administration of Customs published by Reuters. While Russia attempts to sell its crude barred from sale in the West, in Asia at discounts, a Saudi Aramco joint venture plans to build a $10 billion refining and petrochemical complex in China over the next 3 years, the Saudi oil giants announced on Sunday. The complex in northeast China will have the capacity to process 300,000 BPD, of which Aramco will supply 21,000 BPD. This is how Saudi Arabia is securing long-term demand in China. The project marks a critical turning point in our continuous downstream expansion plan in China and the surrounding area, which is becoming an increasingly important driver of global petrochemical demand. 480 BPD of Arabian crude oil will be supplied to a Rongsheng affiliate, the Zhejiang Petroleum and Chemical Company Limited ZPC, under a long-term sales agreement, according to Mohammed Al-Khatni, executive vice president of downstream at Aramco. These two deals give Aramco a long-term export outlet to 690 BPD of Saudi crude to China, which would be beneficial. The acquisition shows Aramco's dedication to China over the long term and confidence in the fundamentals of the country's petrochemical industry. Al-Qahtani noted that as part of a larger strategy, it also guarantees a steady supply of crucial crude to one of China's most significant refiners. The tragic war in Yemen is only one illustration. Due to Saudi Arabia's lower cost of oil production than Iran's, part of the Saudi strategy has been to artificially keep oil prices low, preferably below the $65 per barrel figure that some analysts believe is the price Iran needs to balance its budget. As a result, it is not surprising that almost immediately after the Chinese negotiated the Iran-Saudi deal, OPEC, the oil cartel of which many in the West believe that most of the world is against Putin's war in Russia and want sanctions on Russia to work. However, The Economist intelligence unit has just published an analysis showing that support for Russia is growing in the developed world, partly motivated by memories of European colonialism, a new Russia-China-India bloc forming in the EA. As last week, and a potential new Russia-China-India bloc. Getting a meeting with Modi is difficult, and the conversation had a compelling context ever since the Ukraine war started. Nikolai Patrushev, the secretary of Russia's influential Security Council, met with India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi in a private encounter. Details about what was discussed are notoriously scarce in the public domain. Russia's economy has relied heavily on trade ties with India and China to maintain its war effort. The unprecedented severity of the West's sanctions against Moscow forced Russia's President Vladimir Putin to essentially build a parallel economy to avoid dollar transactions and keep those ties going. As a result, in the wake of the invasion, Russia's trade with China and the Chinese yuan multiplied by an extraordinary 80 times during a meeting with China's President Xi Jinping. Over the past fiscal year, India's imports from Russia have increased by a startling 400%. Russia is now India's fourth largest trade partner and still surging. It was the seventh largest only in October. It's no surprise, then, that Patrushev had been accompanied on his trip by the chairman of Rosneft, Russia's state-owned oil company, who signed an agreement with the Indian Oil Corporation to increase supplies. It is safe to say the partnership between China and Saudi Arabia in the oil industry is a significant development that could have far-reaching implications for the Middle East and the global energy market. The increasing economic and geopolitical ties between these two countries could lead to a shift in the balance of power in the region, and it could weaken the U.S. position in the Middle East. Additionally, as China becomes more involved in the global oil market, it could have implications for the U.S. shale oil industry and alter the dynamics of the global oil trade. The long-term implications of this partnership remain uncertain, but it is clear that it represents a significant shift in the global energy landscape. As China's demand for oil continues to grow, it is increasingly looking to secure its energy supplies by partnering with key oil-producing countries, such as Saudi Arabia. As such, this partnership is likely to shape the future of the global energy market and have significant geopolitical implications for years to come. Saudi Arabia is being positioned by MBEs as one of the pivotal states between the United States and China. While America already guarantees Germany's security and more lately pressures it to purchase American-made weaponry, Saudi Arabia wants to have the best of both worlds, as Germany does. China, not the United States, is where the German export economy views its future. It is accurate, but misleading to refer to the United States as Saudi Arabia's largest export market, because in 2022, the U.S. will have purchased 14% of all of Saudi Arabia's exports, with the value of its next three largest export markets being all in Asia. Japan 13%, China 12%. The demand from Asia will only increase, with South Korea accounting for 10% and India for 8% of Saudi exports, which triples the value of those goods' value to the United States. The Saudis began their economic pivot last week, joining the Chinese-sponsored Shanghai Cooperation Organization as observers before becoming active members. Discussions with China about selling oil for Chinese yuan rather than US dollars are still ongoing, and the petrodollar's days are numbered. Israel is headed in a similar direction, and the Americans continue to supply Israel's most sophisticated defense requirements and serve as its top export market. Israel's exports to Hong Kong accounted for 28% of its $18.7 billion export value in 2022, but China and India were the country's second and third largest export destinations. 2 and 5%. Israel's Asian exports to South Korea, Singapore, Japan, and other countries total well over 20% in 2021. By the end of the decade, Israel's exports to Asia will have increased by $14.5 billion because to Saudi shipments to the region. Israel's main market is anticipated to be in Asia rather than the United States. Israel has tried to avoid participating in the conflict in Ukraine in order to maintain its strategic connections with Russia. The ramifications for the U.S.-Israel alliance are clear. If the U.S. and China continue on their collision course, Israel will confront a similar problem as did Russia and China in the past. India bloc developing in the East, a potentially significant meeting that took place last week in New Delhi, on the margins of a meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization (SCO), went notably ignored in most of the West. Getting a meeting with Modi is difficult, and the conversation had a compelling context ever since the Ukraine war started. Nikolai Patrushev, the secretary of Russia's influential Security Council, met with India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi in a private encounter. Details about what was discussed are notoriously scarce in the public domain. Russian President Vladimir Putin had to essentially create a parallel economy to avoid dollar transactions and maintain those ties, just so in the wake of the invasion. Trade with China in the Chinese yuan multiplied by an extraordinary 80 times during a meeting with China's president. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found this geopolitical case study informative and valuable. If you enjoyed this content, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos on business case study, geopolitics, and investing. Also, don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest uploads. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you again for your support, and we'll see you in the next video.